Alright, everybody, welcome back to Reading Capital, Chapter 1. Last time we finished off Section 1, and so this time we're starting off with Section 2. And as expected, pretty much everyone else dropped out. Last time we had about something like 10 people. This time we only have half of that. Yeah, I've read it before. I've read it almost twice. And, yeah. So, really, we were kind of dealing with a bit of rereading, but that's okay. Anybody need a slight overview of the last sections? I know I went a bit overboard with my critical comments. I'll try not to do that. Yeah, just a quick overview. Section 1 was basically commodities, definition of commodities. It went a bit into value, what value is, labor, social necessary labor time, the exchange of commodities shows their values in exchange value. There's use value, which is consumptive value. Simple stuff, I think. But let's go into section 2, the twofold character of the labor embodied in commodities. So here is a bit of the expansion on the labor's year value. At first sight, a commodity presented itself to us as a complex of two things, use value and exchange value. Later on, we saw also that labor, too, possesses the same twofold nature, for so far as it finds expression in value, it does not possess the same characteristics as belong to it as a creator of use values. I was the first to point out and to examine critically this twofold nature of the labor contained in commodities. As this point is a pivot on which the clear comprehension of political economy turns, we must go into more detail. So this is the difference between concrete labor and abstract labor, or rather labor time. Let us take two commodities, such as a coat and 10 yards of linen, and let the former be double the value of the latter, so that if 10 yards of linen equals W, the coat equals 2W. The coat is a use value that satisfies a particular want. Its existence is the result of a special sort of productive activity, nature of which is determined by its aim, mode of operation, subject, means, and result. The labor whose utility is thus represented by the value in use of its product, or which manifests itself by making its product a use value, we call useful labor. In this connection, we consider only its useful effect. So, obviously, the caveat that labor as such cannot account for value. It has to be desired labor, useful labor. Continuing, as the coat and the linen are two qualitatively different use values, so also are the two forms of labor that produce them, tailoring and weaving. Were these two objects not qualitatively different, not produced respectively by labor of different quality, they could not stand to each other in the relation of commodities. Coats are not exchanged for coats. One use value is not exchanged for another of the same kind. I don't know, money is exchanged for money. But it's different kinds of money. So continuing. To all the different varieties of values in use, there correspond as many different kinds of useful labor, classified according to the order, genus, species, and variety to which they belong in the social division of labor. Big fancy philosophical words. This division of labor is a necessary condition for the production of commodities, but it does not follow, conversely, that the production of commodities is a necessary condition for the division of labor. In the primitive Indian community, there is a social division of labor without production of commodities, or, to take an example near home, in every factory the labor is divided according to a system, but this division is not brought about by the operatives mutually exchanging their individual products. Only such products can become commodities with regard to each other, as result from the different kinds of labor, each kind being carried on independently and for the account of private individuals. Continuing. To resume then, in the use value of each commodity there is contained useful labor, that is, productive activity of a definite kind and exercised with a definite aim. Use values cannot confront each other as commodities unless the useful labor embodied in them is qualitatively different in each of them. In a community, the produce of which in general takes the form of commodities, that is, in a community of commodity producers, this qualitative difference between the useful forms of labor that are carried on independently by individual producers, each on their own account, develops into a complex system, a social division of labor. So pretty clear, in order to have commodity exchange, different people must be producing different things in order to exchange. It also must be divided along this necessary difference is a necessary division of labor. So with commodities you already have, commodity production specifically, not commodities themselves, but with commodity production you have a necessary division of labor. So continuing. Anyhow, whether the coat be worn by the tailor or by his customer, in either case it operates as a use value. Nor is the relation between the coat and the labor that produced it altered by the circumstance that tailoring may have become a special trade, an independent branch of the social division of labor. Wherever the want of clothing forced them to it, the human race made clothes for thousands of years, without a single man becoming a tailor. But coats and linen, like every other element of material wealth that is not the spontaneous produce of nature, must invariably owe their existence to a special productive activity, exercised with a definite aim, an activity that appropriates particular nature-given materials, particular human wants. So far, therefore, as labor is creator of use value, is useful labor. It is a necessary condition, independent of all forms of society, for the existence of the human race. It is an eternal, nature-imposed necessity, without which there can be no material exchanges between man and nature, and therefore no life. Okay. Sorry, I was just quickly rereading to kind of catch the point of this. Okay, so the important part is that the last sentence in that paragraph. So far, therefore, as labor is a creator of use value, is useful labor, it is a necessary condition independent of all forms of society for the existence of the human race. It is an eternal, nature-imposed necessity without which there can be no material exchanges between man and nature, and therefore no life. Basically just saying labor is transhistorical. Labor is not just the case that, we have to work in capitalism. Technically we have to work in every form of society, including the future society of communism. This goes into a point which Marx makes none of his published writings, but there's some letters where he talks. Some people ask him, like, how are you so sure that the labor is the source of value? And one of the arguments that Marx goes to is an argument based on this. I forget who. I think it's in a letter to Kugelman, in which Marx Kugelman asks, like, how do you know? Like, what's your proof for that labor is the source of value? And Marx says, like, look, have any country stop work for just a mere week and see what happens to the economy. Which is, frankly, at face value, just a smackdown argument. But when you really think about it in detail, it really isn't. It proves that labor is necessary. It's a transcendental necessity. For the economy in general, for commodity production in general, but that does not make it or signify it as the source of value. Although one can account that for being a source of value for produced commodities. So that sentence highlight that it's actually something worth remembering. Continuing, the use values coat, linen, etc., that is, the bodies of commodities, are combinations of two elements, matter and labor. If we take away the useful labor expended upon them, the material substratum is always left, which is furnished by nature without the help of man. The latter can work only as nature does, that is, by changing the form of matter. Nay, more. In this work of changing the form, he is constantly helped by natural forces. We see then that labor is not the only source of material wealth, of use values produced by labor. As William Petty puts it, labor is its father and the earth its mother. So some people get confused by this, by the way, because Marx reiterates this in the Critique of the Gotha program, where he just rephrases what he says here, that nature is also a source of use values. Some people misunderstand that and think that Marx is saying that nature is a source of value, meaning economic value. And Marx does not mean that. Although personally, like from my own critical standpoint, I think that's actually true, that nature is indeed a source of values. As economic values. I mean, you can just walk around, pick stuff from nature. Nature's done all the work for you. Nature has created it, and yet you get to claim it as yours and say it's mine, and now you can exchange it by whatever arbitrary measure you wish. But nonetheless, nature is the one that does it, but you are the one who claims its value. Not that nature cares about value, but value can be made to happen in any of those circumstances. But once again, that's not Marx's standpoint. Marx's standpoint is human labor is the only thing that creates value. Nature creates use values, but does not create value as such. Continuing. Let us now pass from the commodity considered as a use value to the value of commodities. By our assumption, the coat is worth twice as much as the linen, but this is a mere quantitative difference, which for the present does not concern us. We bear in mind, however, that if the value of the coat is double that of 10 yards of linen, 20 yards of linen must have the same value as one coat. So far as they are values, the coat and the linen are things of a like substance, objective expressions of essentially identical labor. But tailoring and weaving are qualitatively different kinds of labor. There are, however, states of society in which one and the same man does tailoring and weaving alternatively, in which case these two forms of labor are mere modifications of the labor of the same individual, and not special and fixed functions of different persons, just as the coat which our tailor makes one day, and the trousers which we makes another day, imply only a variation of the labor of one and the same individual. Moreover, we see at a glance that, in our capitalist society, a given portion of human labor is, in accordance with the varying demand, at one time supplied in the form of tailoring, at another in the form of weaving. This change may possibly not take place without friction, but take place it must. And so here we're getting into the third thing argument, the substance of value. What is it in commodities which is equal? It's not their concrete labor. Continuing productive activity, if we leave out of sight its special form, viz. the useful character of the labor, is nothing but the expenditure of human labor power. Tailoring and weaving, though qualitatively different productive activities, are each productive expenditure of human brains, nerves, and muscles. In this sense, are human labor. They are but two different modes of expending human labor power. Of course, his labor power, which remains the same under all its modifications, must have attained a certain pitch of development before it can be expended in a multiplicity of modes. But the value of a commodity represents human labor in the abstract, the expenditure of human labor in general. And just as in society a general or a banker plays a great part, but mere man on the other hand, a very shabby part, so here with mere human labor, it is the expenditure of simple labor power, that is, of labor power which, on an average, apart from any special development, exists in the organism of every ordinary individual. Simple average labor, it is true, varies in character in different countries and at different times, but in particular society it is given. Skilled labor counts only as simple labor intensified, or rather as multiplied simple labor, a given quantity of skilled being considered equal to a greater quantity of simple labor. Experience shows that this reduction is constantly being made. A commodity may be the product of the most skilled labor, but its value, by equating it to the product of simple unskilled labor, represents a definite quantity of the latter labor alone. The different proportions in which different sorts of labor are reduced to unskilled labor as their standard are established by a social process that goes on behind the backs of producers and consequently appears to be fixed by custom. For simplicity's sake, we shall henceforth account every kind of labor to be unskilled, simple labor. By this we do no more than save ourselves the trouble of making the reduction. So this is actually this is a key problem, because people who obsess about the labor theory of value have to face up to this eventually, and it's just like, how do you account for simple and complex labor? Like, if you're going to plan the economy and you're obsessed with maximizing and allocating labor and the proceeds of labor, how do you know what the right amount of the multiples of simple labor is? How do you know what even the basic unit of simple labor is? And the answer is, well, there isn't really a way to say that, because there is no measure Marx ever finds, nor which I think he fundamentally cares about. I don't think Marx really fundamentally cares about this so-called distinction, because it's not really an economic distinction at all. This is really a subjective distinction. Why is a manager paid more than the guy who's working his ass off in the back room? Because society perceives it that way. Even though, being a manager doesn't take, amazing brains or anything. I mean, most managers are dunces. So, the reason for their being paid more, it has nothing to do with some complex labor or anything. It's simply social perception. Why is a doctor paid so much more than a regular person? No reason, really, other than society views it as valuable as such. Because it's not based on, it takes so many years for a doctor to be paid to be skilled in that way. Nobody really knows what that complex is. It's just a number that's socially arrived at. When he says it's just he says they appear to be fixed by custom. That's pretty much it. It's a social convention. People come to agree with it, but it's actually not based on anything. So the distinction of skilled and simple labor really is a nonsense distinction. It doesn't really exist. There is no such thing as simple labor as such. And Marx will never really go on with this, except for the few times where he tries to work this out, but it never really works out. But it doesn't really have anything really to add to the theory of value. So don't really worry about it. I mean, it really is just a case of literally ideology. We see that some people are paid more and some people are paid less, and we literally, Marx here is projecting some idea of like it must be to do with the labor, when in fact it's not. Yeah, don't. If you have like any questions, just ask it. It makes things better, anyways. So continuing, just as therefore in reading the code and linen as values, we abstract from their different use values, so it is with the labor represented by those values. We disregard the difference between its useful forms, weaving and tailoring. As the use values, code and linen are a combination of special productive activities with cloth and yarn. Yeah, this seems to be very repetitive. I'll skip to the next paragraph. Coats and linen, however, are not merely values, but values of definite magnitude, and according to our assumption, the coat is worth twice as much as the 10 yards of linen. Whence this difference in their values? It is owing to the fact that the linen contains only half as much labor as the coat, and consequently that in production of the latter, labor power must have been expended during twice the time necessary for the production of the former. While therefore, with reference to use value, the labor contained in the commodity counts only qualitatively, with reference to value it counts only quantitatively. It must first be reduced to human labor, pure and simple. In the former case, it is a question of how and what, in the latter of how much. How long a time? Since the magnitude of the value of a commodity represents only the quantity of labor embodied in it, it follows that all commodities, when taken in certain proportions, must be equal in value. If the productive power of all different sorts of useful labor required for the production of a coat remains unchanged, the sum of the values of the coats produced increases with their number. And the rest is a repetition of the same kind of examples, so I'll skip that. Continuing, next paragraph. An increase in the quantity of use values is an increase of material wealth. With 2 coats, 2 men can be clothed. With 1 coat, only 1 man. Nevertheless, an increased quantity of material wealth may correspond to a simultaneous fall in the magnitude of its value. This antagonistic movement has its origin in the twofold character of labor. Productive power has reference, of course, only to labor of some useful concrete form. The efficacy of any special productive activity during a given time being dependent on its productiveness, useful labor becomes therefore a more or less abundant source of products, in proportion to the rise or fall of its productiveness. On the other hand, no change in this productiveness affects the labor represented by value. Since productive power is an attribute of the concrete useful forms of labor, of course it can no longer have any bearing on that labor, so soon as we make abstraction from those concrete useful forms. However, then, productive power may vary. The same labor exercised during equal periods of time always yields equal amounts of value, but it will yield during equal periods of time different quantities of values in use, more if the productive power rise, fewer if it fall. The same change in productive power, which increases the fruitfulness of labor and in consequence the quantity of use values produced by that labor, will diminish the total value of this increased quantity of use values, provided such change shorten the total labor time necessary for the production, and vice versa. On the one hand, all labor is, speaking physiologically, an expenditure of human labor power, and in its character of identical abstract human labor, it creates and forms the value of commodities. On the other hand, all labor is the expenditure of human labor power in a special form and with a definite aim, and in this its character of concrete useful labor. It produces use values. So there you have the short version of a seeming dialectic between concrete labor and abstract labor. That's something differentiated and material creates something undifferentiated and immaterial. Concrete labor creates use values. Abstract labor creates value. So just an interesting so-called contradiction. And I just had it dawn on me. Well, I had this dawn on me like a while back. It's just I hadn't thought about it in a while. That considering this last paragraph about the increase in the quantity of use values is an increase in material wealth. That part of what the capitalists usually say, right, is that as things get cheaper, our own wealth increases even if our wages don't increase, because everything we consume becomes cheaper, so our own buying power, rises even if it isn't increased as such, following an increase in productivity. And this is like another thing that goes along with what surplus and surplus value are and how they function. In that, this is just an aside comment. Don't take this to be reflective about the text. In that, if by Marx's own criteria here, that labor is what is recognized in the value of things, and that as productivity rises, here he hasn't yet talked about socially necessary labor time, which explains how a rise in productivity in general will also lead to a drop in the value of each unit produced, but the total aggregate value remains the same. And that has to do with a lot of things Marx is interested in: the total labor that can be allocated in society, total manpower, total labor hours, and what can be produced with that, and who gets what with what, basically. And anyway, so where was I going with it? Oh yeah, that capital, lowers prices. One, to remain competitive, and two, to hopefully gain a market share if it gains the advantage of a lower productive cost before any other capitals. So it gains a surplus value on that. The rest of society then enjoys a further surplus, in that less labor is necessary for creating the necessary amounts of things being done in one place. The biggest example of the modern day has been agriculture. Globally, at least in the US, in advanced countries, less than 2% of the population works in agriculture. That's how productive agriculture is. You can feed the entire country with 2 out of every 100 people working on it. That makes those other people free to work on other things. So it frees up labor to do whatever else it will be doing. So there you have the surplus of labor, and you also have later on will be the surplus value. So, right, section 3, the form of value or exchange value. Yeah, then no problem not finishing it. So, section 3. Commodities. He hasn't clarified it, because what. Well, it creates creates exchange value only as value. It manifests in exchange value. Uh, yeah, he hasn't explained it. The explanation will come with socially necessary labor time. That's what really. That's what abstract labor really is. It's socially necessary labor time. Here, he seemed to be linking it more to labor power, whereas labor power is the potential form of concrete labor, which can manifest as all forms of concrete labor. Labor power can be for anything in general. Likewise, value is anything, it represents anything in general. Yeah, it was a point to show that division of labor does not imply commodity production. So, section 3, the form of value or exchange value. Commodities come into the world in the shape of use values, articles or goods such as iron, linen, corn, etc. This is their plain, homely, bodily form. They are, however, commodities only because they are something twofold, both objects of utility and, at the same time, depositories of value. They manifest themselves, therefore, as commodities, or have the form of commodities, only insofar as they have two forms, a physical or natural form, and a value form. The reality of the value of commodities differs in this respect from Dame Quickly, that we don't know where to have it. The value of commodities is the very opposite of the coarse materiality of their substance. Not an atom of matter enters into its composition. Turn and examine a single commodity by itself as we will, yet insofar as it remains an object of value, it seems impossible to grasp it. If, however, we bear in mind that the value of commodities has a purely social reality, and that they acquire this reality only insofar as they are expressions or embodiments of one identical substance, identical social substance, viz., human labor, it follows as a matter of course that value can only manifest itself in the social relation of commodity to commodity. In fact, we started from exchange value, or the exchange relation of commodities, in order to get at the value that lies hidden behind it. We must now return to this form under which value first appeared to us. So when he says identical social substance, human labor, um, that's a bit problematic in that human labor as such is not really a social substance. It's only one must always obviously qualify it with desired human labor, which is, by the way, ironic. Ironic is not the right word. I'll think of a better word, but what I want to say is that the fact that a human labor needs to be first desired in order for it to actually create value, to count as value, shows that there is a psychological primacy in the work that has nothing to do with human labor as such being the source of value. So, I mean, literally, to desire things is to basically do what? To value them. If I desire to have a dog, what can I say about that? Well, I value having a dog. The term value that was used by economists wasn't used haphazardly for no reason. It has to do with people's desires. It has to do with what we desire. So value fundamentally has a psychological character to it, which is more fundamental to it than human labor ever is. In order for things to have value at all, no matter what, we must desire them. And it has nothing, and being a product of human labor has nothing really to do with things being valuable. But that's not how Marx means it, well, just always. That's my critique of what Marx is saying here. But for Marx, value is labor, desired labor. He doesn't seem to notice the implications of the necessity for it to be desired, for it to be valuable. So continuing, everyone knows, if he knows nothing else, that commodities have a value form common to them all, and presenting a marked contrast with the varied bodily forms of their use values. I mean their money form. Here, however, a task is set us, the performance of which has never yet even been attempted by bourgeois economy. The task of tracing the genesis of this money form, of developing the expression of value implied in the value relation of commodities from its simplest, almost imperceptible outline to the dazzling money form. By doing this, we shall, at the same time, solve the riddle presented by money. The simplest value relation is evidently that of one commodity to one other commodity of a different kind. Hence, the relation between the values of two commodities supplies us with the simplest expression of the value of a single commodity. Subsection A, elementary or accidental form of value. X commodity A equals Y commodity B, or X commodity A is worth Y commodity B. 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth 1 coat. I think there's a certain point at which, after you repeated the thing like about 4 times, you've done it to about as much as needed. If someone doesn't learn after 4 times, Jesus Christ. So, subsection 1, the two poles of the expression of value, relative form and equivalent form. The whole mystery of the form of value lies hidden in this elementary form. Its analysis, therefore, is our real difficulty. Here, 2 different kinds of commodities, in our example the linen and the coat, evidently play 2 different parts. The linen expresses its value in the coat. The coat serves as the material in which that value is expressed. The former plays an active, the latter a passive part. The value of the linen is represented as a relative value, or perhaps in relative form. The coat officiates as equivalent or appears in equivalent form. The relative form and the equivalent form are 2 intimately connected, mutually dependent, and inseparable elements of the expression of value, but at the same time are mutually exclusive, antagonistic extremes, that is, poles of the same expression. They are allotted respectively to the 2 different commodities brought into relation by that expression. It is not possible to express the value of linen in linen. 20 yards of linen equals 20 yards of linen is no expression of value. On the contrary, such an equation merely says that 20 yards of linen are nothing else than 20 yards of linen, a definite quantity of the use value linen. The value of the linen can therefore be expressed only relatively, that is, in some other commodity. The relative form of the value of the linen presupposes therefore the presence of some other commodity, here the coat, under the form of an equivalent. On the other hand, the commodity that figures as the equivalent cannot at the same time assume the relative form. That second commodity is not one whose value is expressed. Its function is merely to serve as the material in which the value of the first commodity is expressed. So, this is a really autistic point, but I suppose it's necessary in that, at least here, here you must clear your mind of everything else that you know about economics and money and value that you've already heard, and just think through this on a flat ground, like from just beginning from this, where Marx is beginning, in which you're comparing two commodities and you're asking, well, what's the value? You don't have a third thing to compare them to, so you can't say, oh, the value of balls is, $20 or something. So, in order to literally think this, because you don't have a third thing yet to relate them to, the only way to express value in any way at all would be an exchange value, is of one reflecting itself on the other. So you have 20 yards of linen, and you ask, what's the value of 20 yards of linen? Well, the only way to find out is you compare it to another. You put it into exchange relation with another commodity, say one coat, and then you say, 20 yards of linens are worth one coat. The value of 20 yards of linen is one coat. The coat itself here does not have its own value. It is the value of the 20 yards of linen. So you're no, but that's the inverse. But see, like, to do this, it's like being a nothing. You got to do the standpoint first. But that's what Marx is doing. Like, the reason he's saying, like, these seem like mutually exclusive and they're tied but they're mutually exclusive is that in order to speak of value at this level of abstraction and of basic logical necessity, the only way to do it is you got to take the standpoint of one commodity and say its value is that other commodity. But that other commodity in that same moment does not have its own value. It is the value of the one you're standing in for. So if you stand in the standpoint of 20 yards of linen, its value is one coat. Once you stand in the standpoint of the coat, its value is the 20 yards of linen. But from each standpoint, the other one is not itself value of itself. Yeah. So this is just a point about dialectics. The reason he feels the need to do this is one, he says he's just coquetting with Hegel's form of expression, and the way that the logic works for Hegel is you got to take absolute standpoints. So depending on where you are within a conceptual movement, you're going to treat each space in it as an absolute, meaning that everything is going to be relative to it. So that second commodity is not the one whose value is expressed. Its function is merely to serve as the material in which the value of the first commodity is expressed. No doubt the expression 20 yards of linen equals one coat, or 20 yards of linen are worth one coat, implies the opposite relation. One coat equals 20 yards of linen, or one coat is worth 20 yards of linen. But in that case, I must reverse the equation in order to express the value of the coat relatively. And so soon as I do that, the linen becomes the equivalent instead of the coat. A single commodity cannot, therefore, simultaneously assume in the same expression of value both forms. The very polarity of these forms makes them mutually exclusive. Whether then a commodity assumes the relative form or the opposite equivalent form depends entirely upon its accidental position in the expression of value, that is, upon whether it is the commodity whose value is being expressed or the commodity in which the value is being expressed. Just to clarify, the relative form here is if you have the 20 yards of linen equals is worth 1 coat. The relative in that is the relative form is the 20 yards of linen. The equivalent form is the coat. I don't know why he calls the first relative form, but it is what it is. And so, I mean, just another thing to note. Okay, I guess. Just another thing to note, obviously notice that this seems to map onto the same kind of distinctions such as use value and exchange value. Or at least the same dialectical style. Yeah, but it's within exchange value. Two, the relative form of value. Subsection A. Nature and import of this form. In order to discover how the elementary expression of the value of a commodity lies hidden in the value relation of two commodities, we must in the first place consider the latter entirely apart from its quantitative aspect. The usual mode of procedure is generally the reverse, and in the value relation nothing is seen but the proportion between definite quantities of two different sorts of commodities that are considered equal to each other. It is apt to be forgotten that the magnitudes of different things can be compared quantitatively only when these magnitudes are expressed in terms of the same unit. It is only as expressions of such a unit that they are of the same denomination and therefore commensurable. Whether 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or 20 coats, or equals 20 coats, or equals X coats, that is, whether a given quantity of linen is worth few or many coats, every such statement implies that the linen in coats as magnitudes of value are expressions of the same unit, things of the same kind. Linen equals coat is the basis of the equation. But the two commodities whose identity of quality is thus assumed do not play the same part. It is only the value of the linen that is expressed, and how? By its reference to the coat as its equivalent, as something that can be exchanged for it. In this relation, the coat is a mode of Sorry, my thing got frozen. What page are we on? Sorry, my thing just skipped around crazy. In this relation, the coat is the mode of existence of value. Is value embodied, for only as such is it the same as the linen. On the other hand, the linen's own value comes to the front, receives independent expression, for it is only as being value that it is comparable with the coat, as a thing of equal value or exchangeable with the coat. To borrow an illustration from chemistry, butyric acid is the different substance from propyl formate. Yet both are made up of the same chemical substances, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and that too in like proportions, namely C4H8O2. If now we equate butyric acid to propyl formate, then in the first place, propyl formate would be in this relation merely a form of existence of C4H8O2. And in the second place, we should be stating that butyric acid also consists of C4H8O2. Therefore, by thus equating the two substances, expression would be given to their chemical composition, while their different physical forms would be neglected. If we say that as values, commodities are mere congealations of human labor, we reduce them by our analysis, it is true, to the abstraction, value. But we ascribe to this value no form apart from their bodily form. It is otherwise in the value relation of one commodity to another. Here the one stands forth in its character of value by reason of its relation to the other. By making the coat the equivalent of the linen, we equate the labor embodied in the former to that in the latter. Now it is true that in tailoring, which makes the coat, it's concrete labor of a different sort from weaving, which makes the linen. But the act of equating it to the weaving reduces the tailoring to that which is really equal in the two kinds of labor to their common character of human labor. In this roundabout way, then, the fact is expressed that weaving also is, so far as it weaves value, has nothing to distinguish it from tailoring, and consequently is abstract human labor. It is the expression of equivalence between different forms of commodities that alone brings into relief the specific character of value-creating labor. And this it does by actually reducing the different varieties of labor embodied in the different kinds of commodities to their common quality of human labor in the abstract. Continuing, there is, however, something else required beyond the expression of the specific character of the labor of which the value of the linen consists. Human labor power in motion, or human labor, creates value, but is not itself value. It becomes value only in its congealed state when embodied in the form of some object. In order to express the value of the linen as a congelation of human labor, that value must be expressed as having objective existence, as being a something materially different from the linen itself, and yet a something common to the linen in all of the commodities. The problem is already solved. So it's important human labor is not itself value, or human labor power is itself not value. Continuing, when occupying the position of the equivalent in the equation of value, the coat ranks qualitatively as the equal of the linen, as something of the same kind, because it is value. In this position, it is a thing in which we see nothing but value, or whose palpable bodily form represents value. Yet the coat itself, the body of the commodity coat, is a mere use value. A coat as such no more tells us it is value, than does the first piece of linen we take hold of. This shows that when placed in value relation to the linen, the coat signifies more than when out of that relation, just as many a man strutting about in a gorgeous uniform counts for more than when in mufti. Don't know what that is. Okay, apparently, oh, mufti is civilian clothes in contrast with military or other uniforms. In the production of the coat, human labor power in the shape of tailoring must have been actually expended. Human labor is therefore accumulated in it. In this aspect, the coat is a depository of value, but though worn to a thread, it does not let this fact show through. It is equivalent to the linen is the value equation that exists under this aspect alone, counted for as embodied value, as body that is value. A, for instance, cannot be your majesty to B, unless at the same time majesty in B's eyes assumes a bodily form of A, and what is more, with every new father of the people, changes his features, hair, and many other things besides. Hence, in the value equation in which the code is the equivalent to the linen, the code officiates as the form of value. The value of the commodity linen is expressed by the bodily form of the commodity code. Jesus fucking Christ. Just skip that paragraph. Except for the last sentence. Thus, the linen acquires a value form different from its physical form. The fact that it is value is made manifest by its equality with the coat, just as the sheep's nature of a Christian is shown in his resemblance to the Lamb of God. I noticed that, and I'm like, oh, I gotta read that. So continuing, we see then that all that our analysis of the value of commodities has already told us is told us by the linen itself, so soon as it comes into communication with another commodity, the code. Only it betrays its thoughts in that language with which alone it is familiar, the language of commodities. In order to tell us what its own value is created by, that its own value is created by labor in its abstract character of human labor, it says that the coat, insofar as it is worth as much as the linen and therefore its value, consists of the same labor as the linen. In order to inform us that its sublime reality as value is not the same as its buckram body, it says that value has the appearance of a coat, and consequently that so far as the linen is value, it and the coat are as like as two peas. We may here remark that the language of commodities has, besides Hebrew, many other more or less correct dialects. The German Verstein, to be worth, Wertsein, to be worth, for instance, expresses in a less striking manner than the Romance verbs valere, valer, valoir. Actually, it would be valere, valer, valar, because the V's are that the equating of commodity B to commodity A is commodity A's own mode of expressing its value. Paris vaut bien une messe. Paris is certainly worth a mess. By means, therefore, of the value relation expressed in our equation, the bodily form of commodity B becomes a value form of commodity A, or the body of commodity B acts as a mirror of the value of commodity A by putting itself in relation with commodity B as value in propria persona, as the matter of which human labor is made up. The commodity A converts the value in use B into the substance of which it expresses its A's own value. The value of A, thus expressed in the use value of B, has taken the form of relative value. I feel this whole section was unnecessary. Like, it was just literally a re-expression of the last section in much longer form. Literally just well, no, yeah, he really didn't trust his readers, but also he was just like autistic about it, not being misunderstood. But there's a point in which like it's just overboard, and like this is one of those points. Like this is why chapter 1, which is 100 pages, technically should not have been more than about 30 pages. If he had just yeah. But alright, we've been going exactly an hour and we got to subsection B, and I think that's good enough for today. So, yeah, pretty straightforward. Any questions? Alright, so that'll be it. See you all next week.